is a meal of vegetables where there is love than fat an ox where there is hatred. And this verse, I always really like to meditate on this verse before I start preparing food and a meal for my family. And I am so excited for today's video because I have not made a cooking video in so long, but I'm in my kitchen cooking every single day. It is such a large part of my day that I'm excited to bring you into this little cozy corner of my kitchen because it brings me such joy to make meals for my family, but I try to make them as fast and efficient as possible. So that is my heart posture behind this, but let's go ahead and jump in. So the first meal I am making is a kale sausage tortellini soup with dinner rolls, but they're dinner knots and they're like garlic and covered in parsley and butter. They were delicious. Now, the rolls were so easy to make. I was trying to prep them ahead of time because we did have a meeting that was going to last an hour long, and halfway through starting this rolls, I realized that it is actually done in increments of 15 minutes, not having to rise all at once. So I'm over here adding the yeast. So first you're mixing up butter and milk and honey, and then you add the yeast to that. Now, I was not paying attention to the recipe. Your yeast cannot be added to super hot boiling drinks and liquids, which is what I did. So it ended up working out because I was letting the yeast bubble while we were in the meeting, and then when I came back it was not bubbled, it was completely dead. So I had to kind of start that process over, but I just added more yeast at the correct temperature, and then I was able to continue on with making the bread, and it was literally just flour, salt, and then a little bit of garlic powder. And you let Tina, I call her Tina because she is patinaed, but it's a really beautiful copper KitchenAid, but I let Tina do all of the work while I'm doing the dishes. And this combo of this soup with these garlic rolls worked out so well because of the 15 increments. Just as I was waiting for something to happen for 15 minutes with the rolls, I was able to go in and start with the soup. So the base of the soup is garlic and onion, and you're going to get Italian sausage. Now, I mix together Italian sausage with just pork, and I always double up on protein or meat when I'm making a soup, or else I find that we get hungry, and my husband especially gets hungry really fast. So I always double up on the amount of protein that I'm adding. But you are basically going to add all of that into a Dutch oven or a very large pot, and you're going to brown that, and then you're going to start adding your base, which is 1 cup of heavy cream and then 1 cup of chicken stock. And then you kind of just let it boil for a little bit. While that was going, my rolls had already risen. They only rise for 15 minutes. I'll have all of the recipes that I use linked down below. And then I was able to make them into the little knots, let them rise for another 15 minutes. And then I was kind of just bouncing back in between. Now, I do Instacart when it comes to groceries, so I don't always necessarily get what I was desiring. The kale I wanted was not this kind of kale, but it worked out either way. I know there's 2 different variations of kale. I had ordered the other one, but this one came in instead, which is totally fine. But one thing with this soup that I have noticed is that you do have to add a lot of seasoning. Now, I made it super flavorful without trying to make it too spicy. I do put a little bit of red pepper, but not too much, or else my kids won't eat it. But you do need a little something, or else it tastes really bland. So don't be afraid to add the seasonings and keep checking in on it, because this doesn't simmer for an hour or anything. Once all the ingredients are added, it's pretty much ready to go. So I did let it simmer for a little bit longer just so it could really sit together, but it turns out really good. Just make sure to keep testing it. So I'm putting together some melted butter with some fresh parsley and some fresh Parmesan, because this is what I'm gonna put on top of rolls as soon as they come out of the oven. And my kids thought I was making pretzels. The house smelled like pretzels, and they were just so good. So once they came out of the oven, I just slathered all that on. But the kale only takes about under 5 minutes to really cook. But at this point you can also watch to see how thick it's getting, because you do want this soup to be thick but not too thick. I've made it several times before. Sometimes I've made it too liquidy. Sometimes I've made it too thick. So definitely just keep an eye on it and add more stock and add more milk as needed. But you really want to hit this sweet spot of not too runny and not too dense. I was gonna make the tortellini from scratch, but I like to make one thing from scratch, so I chose to do the rolls. If I try to do both the pasta and rolls from scratch, I find that it's a little bit difficult with how many littles we have in our home, and so usually my rule of thumb is pick one thing to do from scratch, and then that ended up being the rolls. But these turned out so good. They were so easy. I love having this little tool. My dog just ate. I have another one that makes it really easy to put on butter, but she ate it last week when I was making something else, and so I had to use this other spatula instead. But I'm just telling you, these were delicious. Some flaky salt on top. Call it a day. You will love it. Next up is a pot roast. If you have followed me from any amount of time, you have seen me make this. I make it really frequently because it is hidden in my heart. I have it fully memorized. It's so easy. I know my kids will eat it. It's not super expensive to make, and it doesn't take a long time to make. So I am doubling this recipe, which I frequently do because it allows for us to have more leftovers. But if you're not familiar with a pressure cook, like, I promise you, it is not that scary. I always start off with the garlic and onion first with some olive oil, and then I brown the meat. Now, because my meat was so big, it was not browning right, so I had to end up taking it out of the pressure cooker and putting it in the cast iron, browning it in the cast iron, because it really makes a big difference to have it browned first, and then I went and put it to pressure. So you'll see later I do something else in the pressure cook, and I didn't need to brown it in a separate cast iron because it was smaller diced pieces, but because this was one giant piece of steak and I ended up using two big pieces, it was just necessary to do that. So when I make this pot roast, I just put to pressure the meat and the meat and the carrots. I like to make the potatoes separate. There was a season where I was putting the potatoes in there too, but the potatoes get really mushy and I just prefer a mashed potato. So I'm just putting the potatoes to boil for about 10 to 15-ish minutes. I'm getting the carrots ready. Whenever you're done browning your meat, so when I browned it on the cast iron, I do both front to side, or back to front and the sides. So I kind of just hold it up with some tongs. I didn't get a video of it, but I hold it up with some tongs and brown each side, and then I put it back into the pressure cook. I added some salt and some parsley, and then I add the beef stock until it covers the meat, and then I put the lid on. I put the temperature on high and I let it go to pressure. Once it is pressured and it's making the sound, then I counted 15 to 20 minutes. Now, because I had such big pieces, I had 2 pieces in there, I ended up actually doing it for 30 to 35 minutes. I did it way longer because there was so much meat in there and I really wanted to make sure it gave it chance to get tender and just work out really well. So it's pressurizing there. And then the potatoes were ready. My favorite way to make mashed potatoes is with the KitchenAid. The KitchenAid is such a great tool to have because you can use it for bread, you can use it for potatoes, you can use it, you can just use it for so many things. So I put on the paddle attachment, but you have to make sure the potatoes are really, really soft. If some of them aren't all the way soft, it's just not going to give you this really yummy whipped kind of potato, which just tastes really good. And if you really want a super whipped potato, which I love, I also will go in with the emulsifier, and I feel like the emulsifier gives it this really nice texture to it. But I add the butter, some heavy cream, and let it just kind of whip it up, and so it breaks it up for me. and just makes it taste really good. I don't take the skins off. Sometimes this actually just takes the skins off for you, and I'll just kind of go in and peel out some of those pieces. But generally I find that adding the skin gives such good flavor. I did add a little bit of garlic and a little bit of salt and then some Parmesan, and oh, it was just so good. I couldn't stop eating this. It was delicious. Now I try to make our foods as colorful as possible, and this meal was looking a little bit brown, so I did make a little side salad with some mixed greens, and then I always just add olive oil, white balsamic, and a little bit of salt, and it just always tastes really good. The kids love it. It adds just a little bit of greens, and it's delicious. I loved this meal. Now, I have found as a mom of 4, soon to be 5, getting meals done in a efficient and effective way sometimes can be a challenge, but I've recently started this thing where I will make us smoothies in between lunch and dinner time, and that really helps my kids with their hangriness, and it really helps everyone have a tummy that's hungry and ready for dinner, but not to the point where they're just like starving and really upset. When I make our smoothies, I add Arma colostrum to them. They are so good. I don't know if you guys have heard of Arma before. If you follow me on Instagram, I've raved about them before. They just came out with this new sun gold apricot flavor. It is so delicious. We've gone through 10 different containers of this. Like, we use it every single day. It is so good. So if you aren't familiar with how colostrum works, it is a whole food. So it helps at a cellular level with your body. It is so good for you and your immune system and your gut health. Optimizes your microbiome and active cellular health and performance to revive your whole body health. And so just by adding 4 scoops of this to a cold beverage, which is why I do it in a smoothie, it has to be a cold beverage, or you can just scoop it right under your tongue. But doing this makes me feel like our entire family is set. My kids don't even know it's in there. They like don't tell me they don't want it. Like, they just think we're getting a smoothie, but it's like packed with this. Now, they did notice that it was a new flavor because they were like, Mommy, what is this? Because of the apricot. It was delicious. Like, I was like shocked because we've always done the unflavored in case I want to mix other things and other flavors, but no, this apricot is like, it's unreal. So I have a code for you guys where you can get 15% off. I'll have the link down below. It is going to be a limited time, so I'll have that link down below. For our next meal, I did some salmon with some asparagus and some orzo. And salmon and chicken, I feel like, are the two that I try to always marinate ahead of time because it makes such a big difference in the flavor. So I was just mixing together some olive oil, some what did I do? I did olive oil, onion powder, garlic powder. I did a little bit of sesame oil. No, I didn't do balsamic. I'll list it out exactly what I did, but I just let it marinate. If you can let it marinate for at least 2 hours, it makes such a big difference in the flavor. And I did that earlier in the day, and then the only thing I had to do really, this was honestly the easiest dinner that I had made that week. It was so quick to do. For the asparagus, I literally cut them in half, and where it cuts is what I keep and toss. My kids do not like when the asparagus has like that under part, like they just really do not like it. I'd salt, pepper, throw that in the oven for like 20-ish minutes. And then I make the salmon in the air fryer. Salmon in the air fryer and on the grill are my 2 favorite ways to make it. But the air fryer, I'm telling you, just gives it this crispiness to it that just makes it taste so good. I line it with parchment paper. I know they sell like air fryer container things that you can use, but I don't have those, and so I just use parchment paper. Pop it in there. I do it at 400 degrees for like 18-ish minutes, sometimes a little bit more. I did end up putting a little bit more just to make sure it gets that really nice crispiness. And while that was going, I started with the orzo. Now, orzo, I didn't make anything technically from scratch. I was going to do the orzo, but orzo is such a tedious pasta to make because of how tiny it was, and I was afraid of making them too big. So give yourself grace where there's grace. I think there are really great conveniences that we have in this day and age, that we don't necessarily need to make everything from scratch, but this orzo is from Aldi and it's really good. Like, I don't have a problem with the ingredients, and I find that it serves our family well. I try to do things from scratch mainly to like avoid ingredients and extra ingredients and additives that I don't want, but that wasn't really an issue here. So I made the orzo, and then Kerrygold actually just came out. I don't know if it just came out. I just discovered it, but it's butter that has garlic and I think basil or some type of herb. It was so yummy. It was like the perfect thing to add and start to let cream. So I added that. I added some milk or some heavy cream, a little bit of crushed and dried parsley, some salt, and I let that get nice and thick. This you kind of have to like eye and see how much of it you want. If you want like a super, super creamy orzo, obviously add more. I wanted it just enough where it was kind of coated. But my kids, this turned out so good, and they weren't complaining about the parsley or anything in it. Like, they really did enjoy it. So I let the orzo cool down for a second. I added it back in, kind of mixed it up, and then just kind of tasted it to see. I did end up adding more parsley and more salt and more pepper, and then I also just added some fresh Parmesan on top to really like help it kind of stay together. And I feel like this was like the chef's kiss. It really did complete the taste and the flavor of this, and it was delicious. The last meal that we made was another type of roast that I did in the pressure cook, but I did a more Brazilian style dinner. Now, this was a meal that I was making for a friend, and I try to always make an extra meal. Whenever I'm cooking, I try to make more to be able to give to a friend that's like pregnant, postpartum, had a baby like 3 months ago. I feel like there's always someone in the community that needs and could just really benefit from food. And so I always try to pick one meal to double or do that with. This is the one that I did it with. And so it's very similar to the roast that I was making earlier this week, but instead of making and leaving the roast whole, which I did with the pot roast, I diced it. Now, because I diced it, I was able to brown it easily in the pressure cooker beforehand, and then I was able to add the beef stock to it and let it pressure. This turned out really good. If you have a problem with making beef in the pressure cook because of the taste, I have found that adding something acidic afterwards, like apple cider vinegar or tomato paste, or sometimes even I've added like dates to it before, like date sweetener, because sometimes it does get really fatty because all the flavor gets stuck in there. So that's just a little tip. But I was making Brazilian rice. Always make sure to wash your rice. Once I'm done washing it, I let it kind of dry for a little bit, and then in a big Dutch oven, I will add garlic and onions and let those brown, and then I add my rice to that. Now, hopefully by that time your rice is more dry and you can kind of like cook it within the onion and the garlic, and then I add my water, then I add my salt, cover it, let it get to a boil, and then turn the heat down and let it sit at a simmer for like 15-ish minutes. This is how we have always made our rice. This is how we make rice back in Brazil. I know some people vary it a little bit here and there, but it is like foolproof. It's so easy. It's so good. This meal actually was the meal that ended up taking us the least amount of time because everything went so quick. We also did some beans. Now, I usually do with beans, I will saute in a pan like garlic and onion, and then I'll do some bacon bits, but my friend cannot have pork, so I did not do that. I just added the beans straight in there. Now, beans were something my mom always made like from scratch growing up. She would pressure cook them, but I just don't find that it's necessary. I buy these other beans that my mom thinks taste just as good as Brazilian beans, and it's in the can, but it's so delicious. I love that it's in a glass jar, but there are certain times where, yes, you can totally make your beans like from scratch, but it just takes hours. And this ends up turning out just as good. I do add some complete seasoning and some cumin and some paprika just to give it a little something, and then just kind of heat it up. And this dish was done. Like rice, beans, and some type of meat, whether it is like a pressure cooked meat or if it's some chicken or like anything, it just tastes, it's just so cozy to me. Like, I feel like it just reminds me of my grandma, and it's just so delicious, and it's so easy to be able to double something like this and have it feed a lot of people. Now, I did, when it comes to bringing things over, so this friend was postpartum, and when it comes to doing and bringing meals to postpartum moms, I don't like to give them Tupperware because I don't want them to have to worry about bringing it back to me and cleaning it and keeping track, especially if they have a meal train and there's going to be many people bringing things. So I have found that just using like aluminum things, like the food's only going to be in here for a little bit. I tell them to not warm it up in here. I find that it works out and it ends up being fine. I gave her a little bit of farofa to put on top of her beans, and this turned out like just simple and delicious. But these are our meals that we had this week. I pray that this blesses you. I'll leave my code and link to Armra down below if you want 15% off. Let me know if you want more videos like this, because I'm always cooking, so I might as well show you what we're eating in our home. Bye.